Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series, where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild Adventures League module Trust and Understanding, designed by Alan Patrick for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Grayson, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos de Vicente, Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Arash, and Lumpy Spuds. Thank you all very much for your support. This is the third of the Saga of the Worm series, which is, as far as I know, a trilogy of adventures that Alan Patrick has designed for the Adventurers League. The only connective tissue that these three adventures have, besides the fact that they're all AL compatible, is that they involve fighting Caius, the worm that walks, the undead worm-infesting god that is currently trapped in all these different writhing batteries. And that is kind of what it ends up happening. Instead of really telling a overarching story, it just kind of lays out a formula for each adventure, which is unfortunate because you end up like kind of knowing what you're going to do and what you have to fight in the end. At least the second one, you fought this dragon. Spoilers for the I believe it was called Those That Came Before. By the way, these are kind of really bad names. I want to go ahead and say Trust and Understanding is a terrible, terrible name for a D&D adventure. Trust and Understanding is like a self-help book. I don't know what themes of trust and understanding there are in here. I guess there's a little bit of this fallen hero, which is kind of a neat element, but just call it Saga of the Worm, Saga of the Worm 2, Saga of the Worm 3, or Saga, I guess Saga. Probably would have been a little bit better. This is a horrible title. I didn't put it as a con or anything, but it's a bad name for an adventure. And I got myself derailed a little bit on that rant. But you end up fighting these aspects of Caius, and it's these worms that can infect you. It just ends up being a little too similar, and especially now that I've read all three of these in the span of, a couple of weeks versus, played them over the course of a year, it really kind of exacerbates the problem of they're just a little too samey. I do appreciate that this one is staunchly tier 4. The first one was tier 2, although I believe it could scale up. The second one was more tier 3, although I believe it could scale up. And this one is very much tier 4. So the idea is at least you visit them periodically throughout your character's adventuring career. And that's pretty cool. I do like the fact that we actually get a tier 4 adventure. I don't see many tier 3, let alone tier 4 adventures in the DM's Guild. So that is kind of cool to see. But in terms of providing a satisfying ending to this story or this series, I really didn't get that at all. It just kind of ends up being a formula for this kind of AL adventure, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, you get your quest giver, you go to the dungeon, and you defeat a big bad. That's pretty much what it comes down to. But unfortunately, as I said, they all involve the same enemy types. So it's all of these like cultists of Caius or spawns of Caius or avatar of Caius. So they just kind of all end up feeling a little too samey. The one interesting hook this one has, which is on the cover here, is that there is a fallen hero who turns out to be a player character from, I believe, one of the designers' run games. So a player that they had in their as one of their player character made a choice in the second adventure that involved their own character essentially submitting their will to Caius and becoming essentially a villain, which is a really cool thing. It's very, I love all of the, Warcraft and Starcraft stories growing up, and that was very much that fallen hero, a fantasy hero that becomes just a villain with, Kerrigan or Arthas and that kind of thing. So I like that trope. I think it's pretty fun. It's cool to see that in D&D. It's a really tricky thing to pull off because you definitely have to have player permission and a desire for them to do that. But then, oh man, that is the best to be able to use a former player character as not only an NPC, but like a reoccurring villain. That's really, really neat. Obviously, that personalized element is lost on every other group that's going to play this because they didn't play with, that player character. But I think that idea of this being a former player character and a former hero is a neat concept. Unfortunately, I don't think this adventure really runs with that well enough. There's a side, what do they call it? A bonus objective. Let's kind of dive into this for a second. Yeah, a bonus objective, which is, I get, okay, you could call it that. A glimpse of forever, where essentially they enter a dreamscape and kind of see this hero. I forgot their name. De Lomdal, kind of a drow pirate, and that's really cool to see. I like the character building for this upcoming villain. I don't think that sequence actually plays out very interestingly. It's a bunch of like saving throws and touching wards, and then Delomdal just throws himself on a crystal and explodes into worms, and you kind of wake up. So I would have really almost rather just seen that as a cutscene, just and see that moment, which would be hard to do because canonically with your party it would be your party there and not this other character. So at some point you would have to. I would want to learn the story of how this other character, who was a ostensibly heroic player character, submitted themselves to Caius, and make that like a really grief-stricken horror moment, and play up that fact and really build this character so that by the time the players meet them at the end, it's got some stakes. It's got some emotional stakes there, which is, I get, not an easy thing to do when you're crafting an AL adventure. Emotional stakes is way beyond usually the capacity of what you can do if you're telling a series of one-off adventures in like 4 to 6 hours. I totally get that. So that would have been really, really impressive had that been done here. The seeds, the initial seeds of that are planted here, but I don't think the adventure quite uses that concept in a degree that I would have really liked seeing. I think that would have been really fun. It starts off with the call to action, which one thing I really like that this adventure does that I haven't seen really any other adventure do, and maybe this is an AL thing. Well, even then, I reviewed other AL products, and I don't think it quite had this, but it literally has a way to connect this particular adventure to all the previous hardcover 5e campaign books thus far through Ghosts of Saltmarsh is the latest one on here. That's just really cool because, again, it's a tier 4 adventure, so characters have done a whole lot of shit before they get to this one, including hopefully played the first 2 adventures, because that adds, I guess, some more elements of the Caius background, and maybe they're favored by the worm. They're actually like drawn to Caius because they were infected by the worms, which is a gross thing. It's not terribly clever. It's just basically at the end of that campaign, usually in the villain's horde, you find a thing that leads to this campaign. So, for example, Tomb of Annihilation, one of Asarek's tombs indicates the presence of a writhing battery. Or in Storm King's Thunder, Iamrith's horde has a item that will lead you to the town that you need to go to. It's just, it's not like it's interwoven in that campaign. It's just, at the end of this campaign, you find a thing that then leads you to this particular series of events. So it's not very particularly super brilliant or clever, but I do like to see that the effort was made to actually draw in all those campaigns. Because yes, I am one of them that would be, going from one of these campaign books and looking at, tier 3 and tier 4 adventures to run for my higher level characters. So I think that's a neat idea that's there. The call to action, they meet with a semi-interesting NPC called Reader, which is a interesting like seer, mage, fortune teller lady at this town I believe it's in Thay. I think the whole adventure takes place around Thay, in and around Thay, which is a neat area that's not very used in the Forgotten Realms. Let's face it, the only thing used in the Forgotten Realms is the Sword Coast. There are other areas, damn it, in the Forgotten Realms that besides the Sword Coast that we can adventure in, and obviously there's other areas rather than the Forgotten Realms. You can skip as much of this as you need, which is explained in the part where you run the adventure, because again, a lot of these adventures league modules are very time constrained. You've only got, the certain amount of time at a convention or something, for example. Or if you're playing at a game store, you can just skip all this and basically just do it as a, cutscene. Hey, here's your mission. Should you choose to accept it? If you want to go on an adventure today, here's what you need to know. You're just going to this one dungeon. We're trying to trace back the origin of these magical discs that steal memory, these coins, really. And so you need to go to this dwarven mine. That's really all you need to know. And the designer went kind of above and beyond with this first act, and I actually have to skip ahead to the appendix section that lists the details of this whole city in pretty staunch detail. This Almorel is the city name, and it's given, look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half pages of information for recreating that city. That is damn impressive, considering you don't want really your players to be here hardly at all. So it's almost weird that it's given this much attention to detail. It's nice if you just want to use this adventure, as a just take this information to build out a city that your players are going to. I think that's always really useful information to have. I was astonished to find that it's this well detailed and used, considering the city itself isn't really used that much in this town. It's just literally the one person, that one quest giver who gives you the mission, and then you go off to the mission. You don't really need to spend time in town at all. There's no like side quests in here. There's nothing really going on in this adventure, and yet we get all this detailed information. So I'm going to include that as a pro because I figure that's just a bonus cool thing to have. But it's odd that so much attention was given there, and yet it actually wasn't used in the context of the adventure. The real adventure, meat of it, takes place in these abandoned dwarven mines, which is a classic area to use. So it's not quite as interesting as the very first dungeon that was designed for the first Saga of the Worm, which was this underground, like upside down pyramid laboratory thing. The second one, which was like an interdimensional lich's lair, was more bog standard, but at least had an interesting lich in there. This one actually does kind of a similar thing with having an interesting lich character, although here it's a lich construct that is completely optional. It's again listed in the appendix. I don't know. I've reviewed several products now that people have entire optional side quests listed in the appendix. That is a bizarre organization to me. Appendix to me is like, here's your random encounters, here's your magic items, maybe your Dramatis Personae is in there. Don't list like entire side quests that you want played during the, when you list the side quest, say, hey, this is an optional side quest. You don't have to run it. But I would rather see that at the beginning in that section rather than just say, oh, hey, if you want to run this side quest, go to Appendix B. That makes it way too separate. Whereas a lot of times these side quests are some of the best content that these adventures have to offer. And in this case, that is pretty much the case. So the first one is that dream sequence, which I thought was interesting when I read, okay, we're going to learn about the villain, but in fact, it falls flat to me, I think. The second one, however, is the what are they called? The appendix. Nope. A bonus objective. Bonus objective B. So it's Appendix B, bonus objective B. This one has kind of a bizarre organizational style. It's like Scene A, Part 2, and all this gets a little bit weird. But you meet the chief architect of the mines, and she is a dwarf who's become a construct, which has the stats of a lich. And she basically just wants you to clean up her dungeon, which I think is a really fun topic. Obviously, role-playing this character would be really fun because she is kind of the security system of this place. So when you try to like clean up the rubble, you're kind of attacked by the security system, which is neat. You have to repair her sarcophagus. You find her like remains around and clean up that. And then of course you're attacked again during that sequence. I just think it's a neat side quest that adds a lot to flavoring the dungeon, give it more context, give it more history, give it more role playing. Don't put the best part of your dungeon in the appendix is what I'm trying to say, because I think this is probably the best part of this dungeon is this side quest involving that architect lich lady. Since I keep skipping past the maps, I'm going to show you a bizarre part of this dungeon, or this product in general, which is extremely inconsistent map art style throughout. You can see we've got like graph paper doodles. Not doodles. It's that Dyson logo style. This is the full dungeon map, which is really neat looking, but this is, as far as I'm aware, the only version we get is this one with the numbers plastered on it and with a super low resolution. I'm not sure again what the situation is. I know the last one you had to buy the map separately, which I found abhorrent. And this time, once again, we don't seem to get separate map player handouts. So I'm not sure what's going on with the map situation of these adventures, but I don't like it. I'll tell you that. I like this map art style, but I need to see this in a blown up, like, can I actually put this on a VTT or print it out and play on it? And it doesn't appear, obviously you can do that as is right here, but this is the overarching mine map you get. There's a section where you clear the rubble. There's the sarcophagus area. There's a neat part with a giant dwarf's mouth where you can grab a hammer, but it slams shut if you're not a dwarf and does ungodly amounts of damage. Again, it's tier 4. All the saving throws are so huge. All the damage is huge. It's kind of hilariously ridiculous. But as someone who's never played D&D at the upper echelon, all those numbers just look crazy to me. So I don't have a good context for that. You can see here more graph paper for some of the zones, and then straight up what looked like things that got ripped right out of like a Roll20 aspect with some of these areas. I'm not complaining that we get maps. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. I like maps. I like that we get maps. This is the style that I like. I find it bizarre that we get wildly different map styles, at least 3 different map styles that I can see, and B, they don't appear to be actual separate player maps that we can use. Although these you could use by like cropping them out and pasting them, but this first one you couldn't. So again, it's a bizarre situation. I like that we get maps, lots of maps, but they appear to not be very consistent or ones that you might be able to work with for all of them. So that's just a bizarre. Overall, it's going to have to be a complaint of mine. The dungeon doesn't, other than the construct lich thing, there's not a whole lot of other interesting things going on. The weirdest part is you make it around this dungeon, and once you make like a circuit around it, from what I can tell, then you go back to the main thoroughfare, that main tunnel area, and you find that Dom Lamdol person there who's like dying. And no matter what you can do, they die. And in death, they open the final door to the final place. So there's another chance for role playing, which is a good opportunity. And again, I like the fact that we're using this figure. The biggest bummer to me, the thing that makes it feel squandered with this overarching narrative, is you don't have a reoccurring character. There's not even one. I mean, the reoccurring character is Caius, but there's no. You just fight this like impending doom of a god. There's no real personality with it. So it would have been really cool had, for example, this character been an NPC in one of the previous Saga of the Worm adventures, and then you've seen them here, and all of a sudden you see their like dark fall or something. It's just, I didn't really feel any good connection until I read the ending appendix that explained more about this character, and then said that, oh, they're a former player character of mine when I ran this group, and I was, thrilled they made this. Like, all of that stuff is great, and I'm glad you're trying to impart that on us, but we don't have that emotional connection as, players who are playing this. And it would have been really, really cool to see that narrative be interwoven into the earlier adventures. I just feel like there was such a squandered opportunity. I like the idea. I just don't think it was well realized too much. It seems too little too late, because there's not, these AL adventures are not that big. They're not designed to be very big. And it tries to squeeze a lot of that pathos into just a few of those short scenes. And I don't think there was quite enough of that. Also, I think it's bizarre that you make it to the end of this dungeon and you're still not sure what's going on, and your players just have to kind of like, well, I guess we'll just backtrack through the dungeon, and then you see the thing. That always struck me as a weird thing. Like, my players would be like, well, clearly we missed something in this room, or did we not go down one room? It's just, I don't know. Functionally, that's a weird thing to have a magical scripted cutscene appear in an area we already explored, where there was nothing that would indicate that this thing would appear. It's literally just like he's like slumped in a hallway, and he like opens the final area. Like, that's, I guess if they go by and there's like a closed area, then maybe they'll table that for next time. But that did kind of strike me as a little bit bizarre, just picturing my own group and how they would react to like, okay, wait, now this character is there all of a sudden just dying on the floor. What's that all about? So I thought that was a little bit bizarre. Once they have that cutscene, this is another thing that I think was a good idea that wasn't exactly well realized. They get to a room where there's a floating tablet, and they can essentially choose between 6 different choices. And those choices then lead you to your penultimate battle. And it's a neat idea to give the players the chance to choose essentially your next conflict. But the only clue they have are a single word. And the words are, well, one of them is just a destroyed rune, and the other ones are detection, dissension, doldrum, devastation, and doom. No, I don't know why they all start with D. And then B, they're all basically the same kind of fight. It's not like you're choosing like one's a social encounter and one's a saving throw and one's a combat. They're basically all combat, and they're all very similar combat encounters, which is why all these maps you see towards the end, let's skip ahead to the maps. These right here are all wildly different scenes. There's a town, there's caves, there's like charnel pits. And it's supposed to be different things that Caius is doing either in his past or even currently, different areas where these writhing batteries exist. And it's the kind of climactic moment when you're fighting a lot of his minions, basically. Again, I think it's a neat idea. I like the idea of players having to choose between things that they then get teleported to and have to do. But it would have been more interesting had, for example, each one been a riddle, and the riddle would give some kind of hint or clue as to the threat that you then face or the area that you're going to be in. I don't know what the hell dissension versus detection means, and most players aren't going to sit there and, I don't think, deliberate too much on, well, should we pick doldrum or should we pick detection? Like, what? That could be fucking anything, and that doesn't really tell me anything. And it's even the worst result is that I hate to say it kind of doesn't matter. It's kind of video gaming in that way. It kind of doesn't matter what choice you pick. They all ultimately end up being essentially a cutscene. It's a vision of something happening, and then you fight a bunch of the minions, spawns of Caius or a star spawn larva mages or whatever else. They just ends up not being very different. So it was another example of something I was excited when I first read about what was happening, which is similar to the fallen hero trope. And then once I realized how it played out, I was then disappointed. So you raised my hopes and dashed them quite expertly. Neat ideas. I just don't feel like they are quite fully executed, at least the way that I would like to see. So I like the concept of choosing. What would have been really fun is if you chose the actual climax, but instead what happens is no matter which one of these you choose, you defeat the combat counter, and then you go to the next scene, and it's there that you find Dalemdel, and you fight him as the harbinger of the worm. And I believe you also fight an aspect of Caius, or just have that Caius thing, the writhing battery that's like pulsing, in case you already defeated the aspect. So that's just the climax, and I don't know, it feels a little too similar in narrative arc to all the other Saga of the Worm adventures. Just everything. Even this one even had like a friendly like lich person in the dungeon that you talked to, which was a pro on my last one, and I think it's going to be a pro on this one as well. But especially now with this third one, if I'm being overly critical, it's because this is the third one now that I've reviewed of Alan Patrick's series, and it's just too similar. It's the only thing that's really different is that it's tier 4 instead of tier 3, but it's got kind of the same enemies, the same kind of things happening. The fallen hero thing was a neat idea. I don't think it was quite used as well as I would have hoped. And then the choice thing is a neat idea that I don't think was used quite as cleverly as I would have hoped. So I will say that I do like the appendices at the end. I mean, most of them are the side quests, but we get a huge section. I think this one's copy and pasted from earlier adventures, the Dark Obelisks and the Writhing Batteries, how they work. Just kind of general DM tips on how to run this adventure. And then, of course, the appendix I talked about earlier, which is the extensive notes on Almirel, which is pretty crazy. All right, let's go over, which I kind of just did, my pros and cons for Trust and Understanding. Pro, it's an official Adventures League module. That could be a huge benefit to some folks. I'm beginning to suspect that I'm not a fan of the AL format so much for various reasons, but that, it could be a plus. Pro, it's got adventure hooks from each published D&D 5e campaign book, released as through 2019. I did think that was a really neat concept, especially as an AL league. You are probably going to see people that have played through those campaign books, so it's neat to see that draw, even if they're not quite as cleverly interwoven as we would hope for. Pro, it's got a fun side quest helping a Lich Construct Chief Architect repair the dungeon. Once again, I think the role-playing opportunity from a unconventional NPC in the middle of the dungeon works well, and it sucks that we have almost the same thing here as we did in the last adventure, but hey, I'll give props because I do like it, and I like that it leads to more content in the dungeon, and I think it's content that ends up working out pretty well. I hate that it's been relegated to the appendix rather than the actual proper text as is. And Pro, helpful DM notes and appendices for running the adventure and detailing the town of Almirel. Very, very good DM notes. And that was extensive knowledge of Almirel that is way above and beyond, but could be very nice for anybody who's trying to flesh out a town. Cons. Inconsistent map art styles and just kind of a weird deal with the maps in general. I just kind of wrapped all that up into one con, but I like having the maps. Many of those maps are the map style that I like, but we don't get separate player handouts, and the map styles are wildly different to the point where it would be jarring to go from a VTT Roll20 full color detail map to a like graph paper style black and white map. It's bizarre within the same adventure. Cons, very little art, which seems to be I don't know if that's an AL thing, or I don't know if this is just this author's thing, but if you look through here, there's no art until you get to the actual basically appendices at the end. So that is a big bummer. And con, the multiple choice near the end is near meaningless, with all leading to similar combat situations. That one really bugged me. I kind of weighed the pros and cons of the fallen hero thing, and ultimately I left it off both of them, because while I really like the idea, I don't like that it was I just didn't feel like it was very well utilized in this adventure. But the multiple choice thing really bugged me, because that was a neat idea that ultimately falls just completely flat for me, because it just ends up being, it doesn't really matter much, and they all lead to the same kind of combat situation. Final verdict: the brief by the numbers tier 4 dungeon crawl of Trust and Understanding fails to give a satisfying conclusion to the third Saga of the Worm adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.